Hi, I'm Ashley Gansey. I'm Vice President of Human Resources with American City Business Journals, and I'm here today with Stephanie Oberg. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi.
Stephanie is a Compensation and Research Manager for the Employers Association, and with Tim Sorensen. Hi, Tim.
Hi, Ashley.
Tim is a partner with Selection Link, and we are here today to talk about hiring talent in 2018, and specifically hiring top talent. And the current landscape in 2018 is a difficult one. Finding top talent, retaining top talent is a challenge for many businesses. And this is a concern for many hiring managers. So Stephanie, let's start with you. With the Employers Association, you counsel hiring managers on competitive compensation packages for applicants. What are you seeing these days? How does the unemployment rate affect that and the economy in general?
Sure. The biggest thing, companies are struggling to find talent because unemployment is so low. So it's the philosophy and theory of supply and demand. When unemployment is traditionally higher, there's a plentiful supply of readily available candidates, so it's easier for companies to attract that talent. Now, with unemployment being so low, what we're seeing is organizations are having to really think hard and long about their compensation philosophy. So how do they want to attract and retain, ultimately, this talent that is not readily available? So they're having to go to other organizations and consider, what is that organization offering that's retaining that person, and what do I need to do to attract them to my organization? So it's much more difficult than maybe historically it has been in, let's say, 2008, 2009, where you saw unemployment higher, there was more readily available talent for companies.
Sure. And Tim, you've been for 30 years helping companies identify top talents, and this is definitely a buyer's market. What are you seeing?
Whether it's a buyer's or a seller's market, whether 10 years ago when they had a large or huge talent pool to select from, or today when that pool is smaller, we still have to figure out, who do we hire? How do we select, and who do we pick from that pool, large or small? And I think for any organizations, that's their biggest challenge.
With unemployment being so low at 3% or even less in some areas, there are some roles that are more difficult to fill than others. One of those that I see as a role that's difficult to fill are sales reps. Stephanie, what are you seeing?
I would definitely say that among the organizations across the country, the top 3 positions are going to be your mid-level managers, your professional staff, and your skilled labor force. So organizations are seeing that while the unemployment is low and economy is good from a business standpoint, there's still specific labor forces that they're just struggling to find. And it's for a variety of reasons.
And so elaborate on that. Why is that? What's changed?
I think, one, we're in a time period where we have multiple generations in the workforce. So you have competing values. From an organization's perspective, they are trying to offer and accommodate a variety of generations, as well as workforce demographics and values of the workforce. But there's also just the tenure of an employee that is less than it maybe historically has been. And we're not seeing it decline drastically, but it's declining incrementally. And that's because for the competing talent, organizations are offering a better package holistically.
And Tim, in your experience, what do applicants want today in a job?
You're seeing many more applicants, especially with the younger applicants. I think they're looking for a home. They're looking for somewhere where they can start their career. Oftentimes, they don't really know what that career might be.
Right.
But I think a lot of them are really focused on, I want to join a company where I can learn and grow and develop.
And compensation used to be the main driver of why someone would steer towards a specific employer. What, Stephanie, are you seeing that also needs to be part of a package for an applicant to say yes?
Sure. So I mentioned, from the holistic view, organizations are offering a competitive package. And what I mean by that is the total rewards. And so compensation is just one element of total rewards. And traditionally it was compensation and benefits, and where now there's other values as part of that total reward strategy. So organizations may offer a sign-on bonus initially, but they also may offer a retention bonus that's tied towards some type of pay for performance. They could offer work-life effectiveness, which includes wellness programs and flexible work arrangements. It may also include performance management and career development. So there's opportunities for organizations to compete in this market that is aside from just a competitive pay package. There's also, however, just knowing your market. So I think companies are becoming a little bit more educated around who their market is and what is considered a competitive pay structure. So while they may also incorporate some of the other total rewards elements, I do think organizations are just becoming a little bit more savvy around their compensation package.
Great. So one other challenge that employers are facing these days is finding the right candidate and knowing that that person is right for the role. Sure. Tim, do you have any insight for companies when they're hiring candidates on how to really tell if they've found the right person?
There's something that's decidedly different between a great candidate and an average candidate. And that difference is what we call talent. And by talent, I mean what do they bring beyond their resume, beyond their education, beyond their experience. And so I think it's really important for organizations to look inside and find out who that candidate is. What are those innate characteristics, those natural dispositions that define who they are and give them the potential to become outstanding in their role.
Okay. And so, so you hit on a good point. A lot of people can cater their resume, their cover letter, their references, really their candidate profile to be what they want it to be and look successful for a certain role. Can someone do that with talent? Can someone fake talent?
They attempt to, and I think a lot of organizations, by looking at resumes, they get in kind of that Ken and Barbie syndrome, where they try to look on the outside. And it's easy to put up a facade. It's easy to spend a little bit of money and create a great resume. It's more difficult to be somebody that you're not and be and act the way that you act differently in normal situations. And by recognizing those attributes, by really understanding what are those characteristics that really define outstanding people in that role. And then we can start asking questions and listening to people, how they respond to those questions, and we can hear a little bit more about who they are, what's inside that person. And it's hard enough as managers to put something in that's not there, let alone try to bring it out and try to develop it and nurture it. And it's really hard to be somebody that you're not.
Right.
Try it for a while. It just doesn't, it's very difficult to hold on to that. And so people tend to put up a facade, but you can usually read and look through that and really understand who that person is.
Okay, great. And so let's talk about why assessing talent is so important for a specific role and just the cost of a bad hire. Stephanie, can you talk about that?
Sure. So assessing talent it should begin with the application process and how you assess your candidates from beginning to end of the hiring process. So from the time they make an application to phone interview, face-to-face interviews, background checks, assessments, and so on and so forth. That process is imperative just to vet the appropriate candidate. And through that process, you're spending quite a bit of money. Some researchers have said that the cost of a bad hire can be upwards of $240,000, so 3 times their base annual salary, and it's because of those steps through the hiring process. Thinking about the recruiter's time to screen them, the hiring manager's time to interview them, but also if they make it all the way through to onboarding, you've hopefully done sort of some pre-employment checks, the references, background check assessments, and things like that. And so without a sound hiring process, sometimes it can be costly of a bad hire.
So in addition to financial implications, what are some other impacts on a company when a bad hire is made?
Sure. So I mentioned the cost of a bad hire from a financial standpoint, but there are lots of non-financial costs associated with a bad hire. You have morale that decreases. You have employees that perhaps this is a position that has been turned over quite often, and so because it continues to turn over and that position's vacant, you're having to distribute the work to others in the department, and so morale in that department can be affected. You also have loss of productivity that maybe isn't as quantifiable because you have not just loss of that direct position, but again, now you're distributing duties to others that maybe they're not as productive because they're doing the workload of more than just one person.
Sure, and one other thing I've seen too is just loss of credibility in a manager, that a manager can't manage, their staff properly or hire the right person, and that all leads into morale as well.
Correct. They get frustrated. They feel as though, when is this going to end? And how many times do we have to turn over this role? Or even in the organization, I think it doesn't always have to be directly in that department where we've lost someone, so now we're acquiring duties. It can have a very far down trickle effect in that if you have turnover in this department, but that department somehow has a relationship or shares a workload perhaps with this other department, they can feel the burden as well. And so it's not just in the immediate department, it can spread further. But yes, they do lose trust in their manager. They lose trust in the process. Because again, you sort of as an employee, but also as an organization, want to make sure your vetting process or your hiring process is trustworthy, and you're spending the time there to make sure you're finding the right candidate. So yeah, it's distrust in the manager, distrust in the process.
Great. So how do you know, Tim, a bad hire when you see one, or alternatively the right hire when one's in front of you?
Well, through all our research over the years, we just know that talented people talk differently. They think differently and they behave differently. And if you can recognize what that difference is, what are those things that differentiate the very best from the rest, then you can start asking questions that kind of tap into that. And I think going back to your said before, there's a point where I think average organizations, they try to think more about how to make sure they don't make a bad hire.
Right.
But in all my experience, the great organizations, they're always thinking about how to make a great one. And so they're really focused on not just what is average, what is the norm, but what really differentiates the very best from everybody else. And whether it be experience or background or their skills or those natural aptitudes, they focus on those.
Great. And how does an assessment tool, Stephanie, help you with that?
Assessment tools are unique in that they can be tailored to the position, so the type of candidate you're seeking. And so during the application process, if you have an assessment tool in place for the candidate to complete, and it's a valid assessment tool, then it should be able to correlate whether or not that person would be a good fit for the position, because you've done the process and your homework of trying to determine what type of candidate do we want, what makes this position successful, and therefore your assessment kind of tees you up nicely for that.
Right. And one thing that I've seen hiring managers struggle with is falling in love with the wrong candidate. Mm-hmm. Tim, you've developed an assessment tool called Select Talent. How does your tool help with that?
Well, I think any type of selection assessment, it enables you to really understand who that person is in objective and reliable terms. And again, it's that Ken and Barbie where we can fall in love. We can say, wow, that person wears a great suit. They got a great education. That resume looks just spot on. And they seem to have all those exterior qualities that we look at. But the best tools, the best assessments really go deeper than that. They really understand who that person is, their personality, what is innate, because those are things that you really can't change. And so for the very best assessments, I think they tend to focus on more what's innate, what is natural within that candidate, as opposed to what things you can change or what things you can educate. We as managers, we can provide people skills. We can provide experience. We can give people opportunities. But what we can't change is what's inside of them. And I think the very best companies that I've worked in the past tend to focus on that, those unchangeable natural dispositions that define excellence in that role. With Select Talent, we're providing you, the hiring manager, a classification that tells you what that person's potential is in relation to the very best. That will help you make a better decision per se, but it doesn't tell you that much about who that person is. Select Talent provides you additional information. They'll help us understand more about who that person is, their strengths, their weaknesses, in order for them to realize their potential.
Great. And so, Stephanie, as you know, as a recruiter, what can someone do to try to find that talent?
One of the things I was just thinking, Tim, as you were speaking, is it's hard not to fall in love with certain candidates. I think you have an idea of what makes that candidate potentially successful, and you're looking at things, the likable factors and things like that. From a recruiter standpoint, and just so you know, that's my background. So while I'm in compensation, I come from a recruiter's background. And one of the hardest things for me was to coach and educate managers that it has to be the right fit for the organization and the culture. And so we may fall in love with this person because they have the qualifications and the experience, but do they also fit the culture and the workforce? Do they, maybe it's a personality fit because in a healthcare realm, you have to work with patients and you have to have find a fine line between delivering bad news but also being pleasant and empathetic and different things like that, which again may or may not be coachable skills. Sure. And so as a recruiter, it's hard to coach managers, but I would say that's another thing to look for is, does it fit the organization and the profile of the clients maybe that they're serving as well.
Okay, great. One other challenge that employers are having is once they find the right person is keeping them and retaining that top talent. Our turnover rate right now nationally is very high. So once you find the right person, how do you grow them? How do you retain them? Tim, your thoughts?
Well, in all of our research over the years, that people leave organizations, well, not so much. They really don't leave organizations. They tend to leave managers. Mm-hmm. And that's why when you pair up a talented hire, it's so important to making sure that they're aligned with the right kind of manager who can help these people be at their very best, who can bring that talent out, who can nurture them and support them in ways that are right for that hire. Employees need to feel cared about. And so when you hire a new person to come on board with your team, it's so important that the relationship is established between that person and their manager, a relationship that person knows that manager cares about me, who's actively involved and interested in my development. Again, they want a home. They want an opportunity where they can grow. They can grow within their own careers. And when they have caring managers who are willing to invest themselves in that type of activity, that's how you increase retention.
Great. Yeah, one thing that I've seen companies moving away from is the traditional annual performance evaluation and more towards that ongoing dialogue, stay interview concept. Are you seeing the same thing?
We are. Unfortunately, sometimes it's too late. Organizations are reactive. I think the exit interview has been around for quite some time, and the feedback I hear from companies is, well, I'm getting this information in exit interviews, but it's sort of too late at that moment. So organizations are adopting in tandem with almost a performance review or performance evaluation, this ongoing feedback. And they're pairing it with some retention strategies, being very deliberate on asking how satisfied the employee is and if there's anything that they can do differently, and what values the employee has to stay. And maybe it's above and beyond pay, and maybe it's career development opportunities or training and development outside of the organization, so not just within the organization. So hopefully you're pairing your performance evaluation with some ongoing feedback and coaching and things like that, so the employee can feel as though they have a say in how their career is going to be with the organization. But yes, organizations are moving away from that traditional, I only meet with you once a year and I give you your feedback. While they still may do that, we're seeing a lot more dialogue happen throughout the year.
So Tim, let's say you found the right person for the role. They've shown you that they have the talent to succeed in the role, but their performance starts to fall off. How can you utilize the select talent assessments to help here?
Seeing a talented person realize their potential to be highly successful in their role starts out with identifying and selecting that person. But as a manager, that's when your work starts. Then you have to invest. Then you have to figure out what this person does best, what are their strengths, how can I best leverage and bring those strengths forward and develop those, but also to be cognizant of the things they don't do as well. Not to try to change them, but figure out how to manage them. Then we're setting people up for success by allowing them to do what they do best.
And Tim, one thing that you talk about is setting up employees for success. And I'm assuming that the ongoing dialogue is part of that success. Is that something that, as an assessment tool, Select Talent can help with?
Yeah. When we select people, we select them one by one. And that's why no matter what program, no matter how we manage that person, it's not we manage them collectively. We figure out who they are. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? How can we set up an environment that is conducive to allow these people to do best, what they do best every day, and find ways to mitigate or manage the things that they don't? And great companies, great managers, they build the kind of relationships. They individualize and personalize that interaction, that ongoing interaction and approach with each of their associates, and find ways to give them what they need so those people can be at their very best. Because when we're at our very best, we're leveraging our talents. We're moving from our strengths. We're naturally doing those things that allow us to achieve excellence in our role. And when that happens, obviously that's when we're the most engaged, because we're actually doing things that are right for us. And we're the most productive because we're moving from our strengths, and that's where our true potential lies.
That's great. And engagement is a word that you used. And Stephanie, I want to ask you, I know that's important for applicants these days to feel engaged at work and with their companies. Can you talk a little bit about what companies are doing to cater towards that?
Sure. And I'll even go as far as before they're hired. So what we're hearing and what new research is alluding to is candidates want to feel engaged before their first day of work. And so whether it's taking them out for lunch or having them meet a colleague before they arrive to the office so they feel a sense of knowing someone and rapport with someone else in the office other than the hiring manager. So I think engagement as organizations, we have an opportunity to start before the date of hire, but then you have your current staff that you need to appeal to and engage them back again. And the biggest step is perhaps an engagement survey. So asking your staff how engaged they feel and what opportunities the organization has to make them even more engaged. Sometimes organizations may find out something that maybe they didn't want to hear, but again, all of that is an opportunity for organizations to compete for that talent, which at the end of the day, I think is what more companies are wanting to do. And so it's an engagement survey, it's those retention strategies, retention interviews, it's recognition. So just from something as simple as walking up and saying thank you to making maybe a big deal about an achievement an employee just received or accomplished.
And I think that the best organizations, when they utilize those engagement surveys, they get it out of the boardroom and they get it down to the lowest common denominator, which is each employee. And so a lot of organizations will spend all the time and resource to develop these huge engagement surveys, access to all their people, tap into all that, but it never leaves the strategy, it never leaves the boardroom, it never leaves the C-suite. The best organizations find ways to drive down what that engagement means to the group, the team, and ultimately to that individual level and act on it.
Sure. Great. So I'm just thinking, we have a lot of HR professionals, recruiters, business owners with us today, and if we could kind of circle back to the beginning here and give them, your biggest tip on how to make a successful hire in 2018, what would that be?
Tim, you want to go first? So from an organization and HR professional perspective, the biggest tip I would say is to take the time to interview and understand the type of candidate you're recruiting for. Understand the position and what it is that you want them to do in the role. Taking just that few extra minutes to not be so reactive. I think in organizations we get nervous. Somebody puts in their 2-week notice and immediately we go into filling the position without really understanding is that the position we want at our organization still? Is that how we want the position to be filled? And if it is, fabulous, let's start that process, but just taking a little bit more time. And I know that's a lot easier said than done for organizations. It's there's a business to continue to run, so I do understand that. But just understanding, again, what is the job we want this person to do? What's the type of candidate that we're looking for? And then also, are we competitive in our package, in our compensation package, total rewards package, to attract those candidates? Because ultimately it's going to depend on that pool of candidates. And if it's those positions that I mentioned, the mid-level managers, the professionals, the skilled labor force, your candidate pool is going to be a lot smaller. So you have to be knowledgeable of what's going to attract them from other companies, because they're probably not going to be readily available looking for a job.
Sure.
I think to the HR professional, it's a lot easier to hire to average. But to hire to talent, to hire to the very best, you have to actively recruit. You'll have to turn over a lot of rocks and source a lot of different people to really find that person who has the potential to be excellent at what they do. And again, as I talked about, what is that potential? What does that look like? Again, there's something different than what's innate, what's natural about that person, what is their innate behaviors, and the things that you can provide, things that you can educate. And the best organizations that I worked over the years, they focus on the things that they cannot change. What does that employee, what does that candidate bring? Things that are unchangeable. That's what we have to understand. That's what we have to select to. But and we can teach skills, we can provide experience, but we can't change those natural dispositions that really define success in that role.
And so I'll just add to that as well. I mean, I think that's another opportunity for organizations to build a pipeline. So maybe this person's not right for this role, right, but because of those dispositions you just spoke of, they could be right for another role. And maybe that role isn't available now, but this person isn't in a predicament where, you know, they're in need of a job. So hopefully, because unemployment is low and you are recruiting from other organizations, I hate to say it that way, but perhaps that person will hang on a little bit longer. You know, so if you're making your organization attractive and positioning yourself in a way in which this person does want to come work for you, even though this one position's not right or a best fit, perhaps that person's willing to wait for what is because of the talent.
I think what Stephanie, great organizations, great leaders, and great managers, they're recruiting actively. They don't wait for
Correct.
the job to open up. Okay, we got to fill this slot.
Sure.
And I know some of the best CEOs I've ever talked to in about this subject before, is they'll always have some cards, business cards on them, mm-hmm. and they'll be on a plane, they'll be in a restaurant, and they'll see talent. It may not be quite right for their organization, but that doesn't matter because they're always trying to access that. And when you see a manager or a great leader, they'll say, I spend 40-60% of my time recruiting, because it's just a matter of getting great people on board. They understand to become great and have a great company, the foundation of that is I got to find great people. And they're actively involved searching for those kinds of folks.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And a pipeline helps with that, as well as if you know it's a position that maybe you're going to fill. So again, allowing those HR professionals to have a seat at the table. We hear that a lot, and that's imperative because it helps them position their recruitment strategies and their applicant pool to fit the business need that may be coming in the future.
Okay, great. Well, Stephanie Oberg from the Employers Association, thank you so much for all your insights today. And Tim Sorensen from Selection Link, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions for me or for any of the panelists, feel free to email at selecttalent@bizjournals.com. And if you have any questions on the product that Tim spoke about today, Select Talent, you can go to selecttalent.com. Thanks for joining us.